Good morning, everybody. How are you guys doing? So, I am going to talk about being unloved, growing up unloved, mistakes I've made, and I'm doing this to try to heal myself, and hoping that, we can become a family here and we can share our experiences with each other because I think everybody can learn something from somebody else. I can tell you what's happened to me and how decisions that I've made throughout my life have just affected my life. How people have affected my life. I read in a book somewhere that a very important stage in a child's life, the most important stage, is between birth and 5 years old. And so that time span for me was not very good. And without even thinking about it, little things that were planted in me as a small child affected my adulthood, causing me to have self-doubt, have low self-esteem, suffer from anxiety and depression, and a very terrible suicide attempt that I thank God every day that I am alive. I am alive. I'm very grateful for that. And how, when I got older, I have realized that, even though I have my children, even though I've had such a terrible life, and a lot of that is because of decisions that I've made. So we're going to be clear about that. I've made some awful decisions, and I'm guessing out of fear, out of just things that were embedded in me as a child. And now, as I'm gotten older, I wish I would have known a lot of stuff I know now. I wish I would have known it 20, 30 years ago. And I think I was told, but it didn't even click with me until I got older. But we'll talk about that, because let me tell you, everybody, no matter what you think about God, He is real. And He will take the things that was meant to cause you harm, and He will work it out for your good. He will. And, I grew up being unloved, but I have so much love for people now, and that's a great thing for me. So let's start. I'm going to go ahead and start, and, I don't know where this is going to lead, but, we'll see where it takes us. So, I am from Texas. Born to a couple that were abused as children themselves. I didn't even realize any of this until I got older, but and so also read in a book somewhere that hurting people hurt people, and abuse people just it's hard for them to love if they don't address certain things about themselves. So I'm grateful that I'm alive. And I used to always say, if I wish I knew what I know now, but you know what? I would change things. I used to say that all the time. I wouldn't change anything. And the reason I say that is because I think if I wouldn't have lived through a lot of my experiences that I've lived through, that I wouldn't be the person I am today. You know, so what I've been through has helped me to be a better person. So, anyway, let's just start. So I was born in Texas. I can remember things when I was 4 years old. And so my mom, from what I remember, my mom and dad were never together. They must have split up after I was born or something. I remember I spent most of my younger years living with my dad. My mom would come and kidnap me sometimes for weeks at a time. And then I would always end up back with my dad. I don't know how that happened. I do have a few memories of stuff that happened. I remember my dad being an alcoholic. I remember him killing my puppy when I was little because I was whining. I remember him taking me to bars when I was little and playing under the table and coloring. And back in the early 70s, I guess that wasn't a big deal. I guess people took their kids to the bar. Nobody really cared, you know. But I do remember when I was 4 years old, my mom come to my babysitter's house and she took me. I remember my sitter being very upset and not wanting her to take me, knowing because my dad was going to be very angry. So my mom took me. I remember one time she took me from my dad's and we were with this guy. She was with a guy. I remember he had a green car. And I remember us going to a hotel and she took me to the swimming pool area. There was a bunch of kids there, like teenagers, and she asked them if they would watch me and she would be back to get me. And so she left for a while. And then she come back to get me. But, you know, I don't know. I didn't have any feelings, but that's just something that I can remember. I remember my mom lived with a black man. His name was Ray. My mom had a baby by him. I was 4 and Mark was just firstborn. And I thought he was the prettiest baby I had ever seen. I was so excited that he was my brother. And I remember being little because my mom had taken me from my dad to go live with them. Well, Ray was very intimidating. I was afraid of him. I was petrified of him because I never knew when he was going to be mad or yell, especially when he came home from work. He would never come in the house. He would sit on the front porch and he would do nothing but he would bring a 6-pack of beer or sometimes a 12-pack and he would sit out there until he drank it all. Then he would come in and him and my mom would go to bed or he would beat her. And I remember one particular day, me and my little brother and my mom and Ray drove to Corpus Christi. We went to some kind of fishing dock or something, and I remember Ray locking me and Mark in the car, and him and Mom went to the fishing dock. I could still see them. But I remember when they were coming back, I knew Ray was very angry. I don't know what had happened, but he was very angry, and he was screaming at her, and she was crying, and I was crying because she was crying, and then he started yelling at me. I mean, and it was, I remember, it was just very loud in the car, and the baby was crying, and Mom was crying, I was crying, Ray was screaming, and it was just like it was just very, very loud. And so we get back to the house, and Ray is very angry at my mom for some reason, and so he starts beating her and beat her down to the ground. And then he starts kicking her, and I'm screaming, and he turns around and he grabs me and he tells me that he is going to spank me next. I don't even know why. Maybe for crying, I don't know. And so he had went to the bathroom, and as he was in the bathroom, my mom grabbed the baby and myself, and she took off running out the door with us. And we ran and ran, and I remember my mom telling me to run faster, and I was running as fast as I can. We ended up going to this lady's house, and she made me sit on the front porch while she went in, and she went in with the baby, and when she came out, she didn't have the baby anymore. And so I wanted to know, where's the baby? And she goes, well, we'll come pick him back up later. And I was content with that. We kept walking for a while. We ended up at a gas station, it was a full service gas station, where, you know, people would pull up and there'd be a man come out and he would put gas in your car and wash your windshield, you know, check your oil, you know, stuff like that. And I remember I had to go to the bathroom. And so back then, the bathrooms were on the side of the building outside. And so I remember her taking me to the bathroom, sitting me on the toilet. It was just a toilet and a sink in there. And she said, I'm going to step outside and holler at me when you're finished. And so I did. I hollered and I screamed for her, and she never came. So I got off the toilet, got myself dressed, and I finally got that door open, because those doors were just metal doors and they were heavy, and I got it open, and the look on this man's face, I can still remember it. When I came around to the front of the store, there was an old man sitting in a rocking chair waiting on customers to come. And when I walked around that corner and walked close to him, he jumped up and said, where is your mama? Guess what? My mama left. She wasn't even there. And I remember I wasn't afraid. He came and picked me up, and he took me into the store and gave me a little bitty miniature bottle of Coca-Cola, the very first Coca-Cola I ever had, and gave me my very first box of Cracker Jacks and told me there was a toy inside if I ate all the popcorn. I had to eat the popcorn to find the toy. So I was super excited about that. And then next thing you know, boop, I'm with my dad again. So my dad had told me that we were going on an adventure, and we went to the bus station and we rode a Greyhound bus, or it might have been Trailways, I don't know, one of the two at the time. I think it was a Trailways actually, because I can just vaguely see the side of the bus, like the writing on the side of the bus. And we rode the bus all the way to where my grandmother lived. I think it took like 2 or 3 days to get there. I didn't know why we were there. I knew I was a daddy's girl and I was with my daddy, and that's all that mattered. I thought I thought I had the greatest daddy in the world when I was 5 years old, And he took me to his mom's. He told me he was leaving he had to go back to Texas. And so I wanted to go. And he told me that I couldn't go. I said, well, take me. I want to go stay with my mama. I didn't know the people there. And I do remember being afraid. And he told me that I couldn't go stay with my mom because my mom was in heaven. And he said she had died and went to heaven. And I never questioned him about that at all, because I thought my daddy was the greatest thing ever. And my dad, an alcoholic, he didn't want the responsibility of taking care of a kid. He told me he would be back in a month. And ended up he didn't come back till I was 12. So, of course, between 5 and 12, I lived with my grandmother. I lived with my grandmother until she passed away. But, it was a very unloving. My grandmother put a roof over my head. She fed me. She took me to church, but it was a loveless home. And maybe her love language was service. I could look at it that way. She put a roof over my head. She fed me. We had a wood burning stove. She would get up every morning, like at 4 o'clock in the morning when it was cold outside, and she would go get some coal and bring it in. And that's what we used, wood and coal, to heat the house. And after becoming an adult, looking back on that, I was like, wow, that was, she worked really hard. But you know what? She never told me she loved me. And she probably never told her kids that either. I don't know. But I felt like a burden most of the time. I know my aunts and uncles, they just did not treat me very well at all. I know 2 aunts in particular that did not treat me very well. And, I think it might have been, they really, really didn't like me at all. They were so mean to me, and I used to talk to my grandmother about it when I was younger. Why don't they like me? Because I knew as a kid, being 6, 7 years old, I knew they didn't like me. And I would ask my grandmother, why don't they like me? And she says, it's not that they don't like you, it's they're jealous of you. And I'm like, I don't understand why they're jealous, because I'm a kid, But my grandmother said, well, I used to help them out with money and stuff like that. And now that I'm unable to do that, and you're the reason, they want to take their anger out on you. And that was very hurtful to hear that. And as I got older, it got worse. My uncle, my dad's brother, used to tell me that I was the ugliest thing, and he would laugh, and he would say it in front of everybody, and everybody would laugh about it. So that really, really, and I didn't realize it at the moment, but when I got to be a teenager, that affected me like big time. It really did. My uncle used to make sexual advances towards me. offer me $20 to go change clothes. And, you know, I did tell my grandmother about it, and she did confront him. And my aunt was there too, of course, her husband, or it was her husband. And she called me a liar, saying he would never do such a thing. Well, guess what? He did. And I wasn't the only one that he did it to. But, you know, I was angry about that for years. And I mean, stupid stuff would go on all the time. Stupid stuff would go on all the time there. And it's kind of like, you know, I don't understand why I'm being treated this way. You know, I couldn't figure it out. And, you know, I also heard, you know, my uncle used to tell me that you're going to be like your mother. Well, you know, as far as I knew, my mother was in heaven. I didn't know. And I didn't have any bad memories of her, per se. I don't remember her being mean to me. But they're like, oh, you're going to be just like your mother, and, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, I mean, it was just very terrible. So, right before my dad comes back, you know, he was supposed to be back a month after he left. I was 12 before he came back, 7 years. And so right before my dad come back, you know, I would always ask my grandmother. You know, she used to make quilts, and she was constantly on the sewing machine. And I remember being a kid sitting in the floor at her feet. And I remember asking her over and over again, do you not love me? Do you love me? And she would never answer me unless she got frustrated, and she would say, stop, or go play, or something. But she just completely refused to tell me that she loved me. So that was, that was something, you know. All of those little things, I didn't realize it at the time, but all those little things I was putting in a card catalog. Like at the library, we used to have these card catalogs where you could go find anything you wanted, and it would tell you where it was located in the library. I was filing all of these terrible things in my memory, and didn't even realize it. And so right before my dad came back, when I was 12, my cousin introduced me to his friend, and I was 12. I was a kid. And this boy, I don't even know how old he was, possibly 16, 17, something like that. I don't know, maybe 16. And I just had the biggest crush on him. I was 12 years old. What? And, you know, that boy told me, I love you, for the very first time. That was the first time that I ever heard that. I had never heard that before. So being 12 years old, hearing that for the first time, I just completely fell in love with that boy. I didn't even know what love was. Really? 12? Okay, come on. And he used to come over to the house and see me, and my grandmother started to get very upset about it. And then one day he came over, and my grandmother run him off, and I was so angry. I told her, I said, I'm running away. And I did. I ran away. And I knew where he lived. And he just lived on the other side of the hill from me. And so I ran away and went to his house. Which, you know, I'm like, the whole thing was just so tragic, now that I sit and think about it, and I had sex for the first time when I was 12, and I had no idea what was going on. All I knew is this kid was on top of me, and it hurt really super bad, and I remember blood being everywhere. I mean, I'm trying to be as graphic, and I'm trying to be as, not graphic, but I'm trying to be as truthful as I can about it. And I went home, and the police came over, and it wasn't just the police, it was a police officer that my grandmother knew. It was a woman, and she took me aside, and she sat down and talked to me, and asked me what happened, and I told her. And she's like, well, did he force himself on you? And I said, no. I didn't know what was going on. I had fell asleep, and the next thing you know, I woke up and he was on top of me. I had no idea. I still had no idea what had happened. So and I really don't remember what happened after that. I mean, like with that situation in particular, but I knew, I do know my dad ended up coming back shortly after that, after 7 years, and it was on a Saturday morning, and I was sitting on the floor watching TV because we were never allowed to watch TV in the house. But Saturday morning, I was able to talk my grandmother into letting me watch cartoons while I ate breakfast. And she finally agreed. And so I had the front door of the house was open. And there was some windows in the door. And I happened to, for some reason, look at the door window. And I could see the reflection from outside. And I seen my dad standing out there. So I got up and went and got my grandmother and said, I think my dad's here. And of course it was him. He had came back. And I was so excited. My dad hugged my grandmother, and they hugged, and I thought, wow, okay. And I went and ran, and I hugged my dad, and the very first thing he did is he just grabbed me by the shoulder, and he pushed me out of the way. And I remember that to this day. I don't know if my dad ever loved me, but I sure hope he knows that I loved him. So, needless to say, he stayed for a while. He ended up trying to commit suicide by overdosing on a bunch of pills, and he survived it. And then next thing you know, he goes to prison. Oh, and the reason why he wasn't there from 5 to 12, because he went back, he went to prison. And then he comes back to Tennessee, and then he gets in trouble and goes to prison again. So, my grandmother used to take me to go see him. But yet, even though we would go see him, he really couldn't look at me, and he never wanted to talk to me, and he just didn't have nothing to say to me. And you know what? As I got older, all those little things that I have filed away, those started coming back when I started my adulthood, and it caused me to make some very, very horrific decisions just because I wanted to be loved. And I was convinced that I was unlovable because no one had ever told me they loved me except for that boy when I was 12. I wasn't around people that were very lovable to me. I mean, people were just really just not very good to me. And I let that eat my lunch and dinner for a very, very long time. So, anyway, enough about that for now. I'll come back and we'll start because things get pretty, intense as life goes on. And I remember I absolutely hated my family. I did. I mean, I hated them. And it's just, I could not believe, now that I'm grown, I look back on that time and I'm like, do you not feel bad about what you did? I don't know. I mean, I think it's, I've always wanted to have a family, and I do have my children. But as of, I have learned over the years that my friends are more family to me than my family is. And that's okay. That's okay. So, anyway, I am loving myself. And I love all you guys. And we will come back again to this later. Okay? So have a wonderful day, and don't ever forget that God loves you. He really does. He really, really does. So, peace out.